Hi there, welcome to Beginner Therapeutic Cannabis. My name is Bridget Surrett and I am with Canna-Patient Resource Connection. Tonight's presentation, our contributors include Canna-Patient Resource Connection, Impact Network, ECS Therapy Centers, and Colorado Medical Marijuana Enforcement Division. And tonight we're actually going to be going over your endocannabinoid system, access in Colorado, dosing delivery methods, go over some patient concerns, and if this were a live class, we would have questions and answers at the end. So let's start off. You're thinking about medical cannabis, or as you probably have heard of it, medical marijuana. And this is the stereotype that first comes to mind. It's very much a recreational stereotype. And a lot of how we think medical cannabis is used is based on these stereotypes. However, this is more of the reality. And the little girl in the center being held is Maisha Chambers, and this presentation is actually dedicated to her memory. She passed away October the 6th of last year. But these are real patients. Every single one of them is a cannabis patient. Some are autoimmuners. Some have nervous system disorders. Some have military issues like post-traumatic stress disorder. And Maisha was fighting neuroblastoma. So what is the endocannabinoid system? You hear all of this stuff about cannabis, but why does it actually work? You actually have an endocannabinoid system. This is a major body system similar to something like your circulatory system or your nervous system. It's just as important. Pictured is a neuron because most of your endocannabinoid system is located within your nervous system or neurons. However, not all of it is, and we'll get into that. But what does it do? It maintains homeostasis, and homeostasis is just your body's ability to maintain or hold on to its balance, the balance between hormones and chemicals and things going on in your body. The endocannabinoid system actually helps regulate that. One thing that is important to know is that if you injure a cell, and a study was done in knees, actually, for osteoarthritis, injured cells actually grow cannabinoid receptors. They are waiting for our body's own endogenous cannabinoids to come in and try to help regulate healing and that immune system response. And endogenous cannabinoids are ones that our body makes naturally. And the two that we know most about, anandamide and 2-arachidonoglycerol, or 2-AG. There are more endogenous cannabinoids, but they are newly discovered and not much is known about them at this time. So when we talk about our endocannabinoids, we're going to focus on anandamide and 2-AG. So let's look at some of the neuroscience. You had that neuron that I showed you in the last slide. This slide shows a presynaptic terminal, which is the end of those little hairy spots right there that are attached to your neurons. Those are called synapses, and they bridge the gap between one neuron and another. So the important thing to know with regard to the cannabinoid receptors, CB1 receptors are mostly housed in the brain and the nervous system, and they are there to help maintain your body's balance as far as hormones and chemical secretions go. THC specifically does bind to the CB1 receptor, and that's how you get the psychoactive effect because the CB1 receptor is in your brain. But it isn't the only cannabinoid to interact with the CB1 receptor, and THC also does bind with other receptors and interact with other receptors throughout the body as well. So targeting the CB1 receptor is instrumental when managing neurological symptoms. So if you're treating something neuropathic like epilepsy or neuropathic pain or things like that, you probably would want to include some type of targeting of the CB1 receptor. Even those folks who use high CBD products and low THC products have some THC in there to help increase the functioning and enhance the functioning of the CBD. So CB2 receptors, these are the other receptors that we know quite a bit about, or are learning. I can't say we know quite a bit about them, but we're learning about right now. This is the most popular one being studied right now. So CB2 receptors are a little different. They're concentrated in the digestive system and the peripheral nervous system, but they are located throughout the body in various areas. Those are just the areas with high concentrations of them. Many cannabinoids actually interact with these receptors directly, not just CBD. And CBD doesn't necessarily act directly on the receptors, though the interaction that it has is still significant. So also know that the CB2 receptor is actually crucial in the immune system regulation, response, and healing. So they believe that for immune system disorders, targeting your CB2 receptor may actually be a little more proactive than just throwing cannabinoids at it and hoping something sticks. So you can actually target the CB2 receptor through the use of various cannabinoid ratios along with terpene profiles. All right, so increased reactive oxygen species, aka stress. This is basically the stress response on the body or the oxidation response in the body. And you can see through this chart, if you have increased oxidation, it's going to affect all of these other areas. The U.S. government owns a patent. It's 663-0507, cannabinoids as antioxidants. So it is scientifically proven and patented that cannabinoids actually do reduce the risk caused by oxidative stress. So if you are in Colorado, this is how you would access therapeutic cannabis. Adult patients, you have to have a qualifying condition, and you go to a physician who writes your recommendation. If your specific doctor will not write the recommendation for you, and you go see a doctor that only writes recommendations, their fees are going to be between $100 and $150 just on average. Know that if you are more severe, that price goes up based on how many plants you actually need to maintain your therapy. Pediatric patients, you have to see 2 physicians, and a lot of places can get you in for between $250 and $350, but I'm starting to see that go up upwards of $500 at this point for pediatric recommendations, and that does cover both doctors. And again, that's if your doctor will not write the recommendation. If your doctor will write these recommendations, then hopefully your insurance will cover it and you won't have to worry about it. But if you do have to go to what's commonly termed a pot doc, just know these are not covered by insurance. So once the appropriate state forms are filled out, and most of this is all done online these days, the patient can visit a dispensary or work with a caregiver. Your plant count, which is assigned by your physician, should be determined by the severity of your symptoms and your patient experiences. Some people respond well to microdosing, but a lot of people, especially as you move into more severe symptoms, you need plant counts that are extended to truly be able to legally have the amount of cannabis you need and to maintain that dosing. So what's next? You got your medical card. So a patient in Colorado has 3 options. You can sign your plants over to a dispensary, which they call becoming a member. That dispensary will then offer you a discount every time you come in, or maybe a special, or throw you a freebie. But generally, it's not necessarily what you need when you become a more severe or a moderate to severe patient. You can't suggest strains for those dispensaries to grow for you. So if you have specific needs, you may not be able to fill them in that dispensary despite signing your plants over. So you have to be very careful about that. And they also do not carry a wide selection of products. Therapeutic cannabis is a little more than THC and CBD, and a lot more than just flower. So it becomes a little more convoluted when you have to go to a dispensary. The second option is to allow a private caregiver to grow them, And if you do that, I would suggest getting to know your caregiver. Make sure that they use organic growing methods and that their stuff is up to par with your quality standards. There are Craigslist sellers out there and people who are just out to make a buck who will use bad pesticides and fertilizers, and that causes patients to react. So you really do have to research your private caregiver and make sure you know them and you know what's going into your medication and your therapy there. The last option there is to grow the plant yourselves. So many patients, they do become members of dispensaries, but like I said, if you have specific needs or you need a higher quality of care, for instance, you need to know what terpenes to pair with what cannabinoids in order to help manage certain symptoms. That information generally lies with private caregivers. Most dispensaries do not have that knowledge as of yet. So, and a portion of the patients, such as myself, do choose to grow their own personal plants, and they do consider it part of their therapeutic regimens. Appropriate dosing. This is one of the biggest things that we get asked about. And the one thing that I can tell you is when you're using cannabis therapeutically, the dosing is highly individual. There is no one set dose, for treating each condition. First of all, we don't have the research to be able to pinpoint that yet, given the way the United States government works cannabis research. We also know that cannabis works differently in different doses. So a lower dose is going to have a different effect than a higher dose. And so it truly depends on what you're trying to treat. And at that point, because of the situation we're in with the legalities, you have to be willing to be your own lab rat. So with dosing, I can't sit here and tell you, yes, you need 5 milligrams per kilogram if you're treating lupus. I have no idea. So you have to work with your body, you have to work with your endocannabinoid therapist, and you have to make sure you're being monitored by your doctor so that you know if your disease is actually being helped or not. Dosing generally will depend on the severity of your illness or symptoms, and like I said, it's highly individual. Therapy can be targeted through combinations of various cannabinoids and terpenes, and that's actually the single most important factor that you need to take away when starting therapeutic cannabis. THC and CBD are fantastic things, but as I've heard Mara Gordon say, there's no such thing as a Marinol junkie because THC on its own is pretty hideous. And the same thing with CBD isolate. These things on their own, they don't carry the shock and awe in the therapeutic value as cannabis in its full spectrum and combined with all of the other constituents. There are hundreds of chemicals, hundreds of cannabinoids and terpenes that you can combine together to target specific illnesses, specific symptoms, and actually make sure you're getting what you need. So lastly, on this page, I wanted to make a note with edibles, and I'm going to say this again. If it's important, it's going to be repeated more than once. With edibles, always start low and slow. The first time you take an edible, if you have never, even if you are the, Snoop Dogg of smokers, the first time you take an edible, do not take more than 2 to 5 milligrams and wait more than 4 hours before taking more. And honestly, I would wait more than 6 hours before taking more. Edibles are processed in the body in a very different manner and have a very different effect than inhaled cannabis. You can smoke an ounce a day or even more than that and still have your butt kicked by a low-dose edible just because of how it's processed. So please heed this advice and make sure that you are being responsible in how you're dosing yourself. Also know multiple strains are going to be needed, like we were talking about with pairing the cannabinoids and terpenes. Each strain is a different pairing of cannabinoids and terpenes. And so you have to do the research and look these things up to know what you're getting. So understand that a cannabis strain that is high in limonene has a very different effect than a cannabis strain that is linalool dominant. And you want to be aware of what each of those things do, what they are, and how it's going to affect specifically what you are trying to treat. I found out specifically I react to alpha-pinene, so I have to watch that. So there are things that could adversely affect a condition that you're trying to manage. So just do your education. Know that each strain has multiple constituents that you need to be aware of that are in it, and you can truly target those symptoms. Cannabis oil dosing can be significantly increased depending on the illness and the symptoms. So be prepared for that. Low doses may not keep you covered. So be prepared to experiment and listen to your body. Let's get into the forms of cannabis therapy. We'll go over topicals, cannabis oil, paste, infused cooking, inhaled versus edibles, and juicing. And at the bottom, I did make a note, layering therapy does boost dose. All layering therapy means is that you are using multiple forms of delivery. So, for instance, if you were to use cannabis oil as a base, you could also use a topical to manage symptoms. You could use inhaled to manage symptoms, and juicing. You could use multiple methods to help increase your dose. And in this picture on the right there, you see a topical, you see cannabis paste, you see inhaled concentrates, inhaled flower, and then just a coconut oil infusion. So let's go over topicals first. They can be tailored for a number of uses. They're incredibly easy to make. It can be as simple as just infusing coconut oil and rubbing it on your body, or getting really, jiggy with it and creative and trying to create like shea butter and coconut butter and using different bases for different things and adding different oils to create different effects. The particular topical on the right is the one that I make, and I have multiple essential oils in there, some for circulation, some for pain, some for skin, just different things. So I tailor it. But topicals, they're not just things that you can rub on your body. There are also patches, there are roll-ons, there are salves, and there are also things like intranasal sprays and inhalers and things like that. So there are multiple types of topicals. How you would use them, especially for musculoskeletal problems like spasms, inflammation, and nerve pain. There are some topicals like rollers for feet that are made as rescue dosing for seizures. So if you're treating epilepsy, I know several patients that have a foot roller, and as soon as the seizure hits, they roll it on the foot. And within 30 seconds or so, the seizure is starting to stop. And the other thing topicals are fantastic for are skin issues, the obvious. So skin cancers included, psoriasis, and scar healing in many cases. Now, cannabis oil. Cannabis oil is the mainstay of most moderate to severe patients' cannabis treatment. This is the base. Generally, you would take, it's either called RSO, Rick Simpson oil, FICO, cannabis oil, Phoenix tears. They're basically all the same thing. Some processes are different, but that's about the gist of it. But this is the single most sought after patient treatment. So, like I said, most of them use it as a base. I take a certain base. I take about 300 milligrams of FICO every single day as a base, and then use other things like topicals, inhaleds, and edible to manage symptoms throughout the day. FICO is an oil. That's a very thick tar-like oil, and it binds to fat. And you'll notice the oil on the tray right there is not black or dark green, and there's a reason for that, and we'll go over that. So again, I'm putting dosing is very individual. There are multiple dosing protocols. So some people can manage their symptoms through microdosing. They don't have to take a lot, but other people like me need much higher doses. So some studies have actually used dosing of up to 25 milligrams per kilogram. So it can be high in some cases. When you are dosing, do not look for an obscure or ambiguous dose. A dropper full, a half a cookie, a quarter of a brownie, those things are not doses. What milligrams are you taking? You don't take half a cookie of prednisone. You take 10 milligrams of prednisone or whatever it is that your doctor prescribed you. And I'm sorry if you're taking prednisone, it's hideous. But again, if you're using cannabis therapeutically, use it therapeutically. Don't use it in a haphazard recreational way. Consistency is key, and unless you know what you're taking, you can't be consistent. To dispel a couple myths here, not every gram is 1,000 milligrams. So I know, for instance, in cancer treatments, the big buzz is, oh, take a gram a day for 60 days. Well, that's great, but not every gram contains the same amount of cannabinoids. So really, what is it that you're trying to take? Are you trying to take a 1-to-1 CBD to THC? And are you trying to take 1,000 milligrams? Because that's what people typically will say is in a gram. If that's the case, then you really need to be a little more careful how you dose your FICO. Also understand with cannabis oil, it tends to lose terpenes. So if you are trying to target therapy and want terpenes, know that even if it is strain specific, a lot of the terpenes will be processed out, and you may have to supplement for those terpenes that would have been in there anyway. For instance, Gorilla Glue is high in myrcene or a little higher in myrcene, but that myrcene for the most part is probably processed out during the extraction. So eat a mango. All right, this is why it's important to watch your dosing as far as what kind of cannabis oil that you use, and why I pointed out the color of the cannabis oil that was on that warming tray earlier. So there are two different kinds of cannabis oil that you generally tend to find out in the marketplace. There's long wash and there's short wash. A long wash cannabis oil is made by soaking the material in the solvent over weeks or months or however long that person feels it needs to soak. Those types of washes tend to pull a lot of the actual plant material and things that aren't necessarily cannabinoids or terpenes out. So understand that you are getting more plant matter and other things besides cannabinoids and terpenes in a long wash FICO. Long wash FICO tends to have extra chlorophyll, and chlorophyll can be useful to help detox your system or treat for opiate constipation or constipation in general. So that being said, you don't want to give a long wash or a really dark black cannabis oil to somebody, say with Crohn's disease, because it will aggravate their symptoms. Short wash is a little different, and that's why the cannabis oil on that little warming tray was amber in color. This is a very quick wash. It's done usually made by freezing both the cannabis and the solvent. But it does not soak it, and it tries to filter out the impurities and things like the plant material. So if you are treating something like GI issues, IBS, things like that, you definitely want short wash. The dosing will contain more phytocannabinoids because it is a short wash, and that's something that I didn't touch on in the long wash, but the difference in dosing between a long wash and a short wash. A long wash has more plant matter, so it has less cannabinoids, which means you have to take more to get the dose. So if in a short wash syringe, say a gram has 750 milligrams of cannabinoids, the same type of gram in a long wash would probably have between 300 and 500 milligrams of cannabinoids. So please make sure that you dose accordingly. If you have an amber colored cannabis oil, you're going to have more cannabinoid content versus if you have a darker color. It just depends on where your belief system lies, whether or not you want that extra plant material in there or you don't. Some people do, some people don't. Depends on what you're treating. Up to you. Just understand you do have to dose and adjust your dose accordingly depending on what you're using. Okay, things to watch for. Cannabis therapy, it does have some issues to it, so you do have to watch out for a couple things. First, make sure there is no solvent in your products. If you take cannabis oil with leftover ethanol or leftover solvent, it will elevate your liver alts. And if you're using it in combination with chemotherapy, that could be very detrimental. So you have to be very careful about your therapy and make sure that it is a quality product. There are also interactions that could happen. For instance, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. Cannabis and cannabinoids can block serotonin. So that combination could lead to medication toxicity. So if you're taking SSRIs, you probably don't necessarily want to use cannabinoids, or you want to lower your SSRIs to adjust for your cannabinoid use. That's between you and your physician who prescribed the SSRIs. But this is just one example of an interaction that could happen. Other interactions that have been known to happen are things like blood pressure medication. With ingested cannabis, usually with edibles and FICO, it can lower your blood pressure. So if you're on blood pressure medication, you might want to adjust for that if you're taking cannabis and FICO and not end up passing out in your kitchen. True story. All right. Things to watch for: know your milligrams and know your dose. You have to maintain consistent dosing. Just like anything else, everything is consistent. Strain rotations and blends may be necessary to keep your body from adjusting to the treatment and to treat different symptoms. Terpenes are important, and they're an incredibly crucial part to this treatment. So you need to learn about it and watch for what's going on. All right, cannabis paste. This is another method of using cannabis, and this is made using low heat by a lot of our caregivers that we have here. And if this is a full spectrum product, the dosing for cannabinoids is going to be lower because it is a whole plant product as well, and it does contain all that plant material. But it can be tailor-made, and it uses a lot of complementary herbs to treat whatever it is that you're trying to treat. Edibles. Think of these as extended release. The effects are longer and stronger. To avoid surgery and avoid sugary and unhealthy edibles. And that is a huge thing, because if you're sick and you're trying to treat yourself, you don't want to be sitting there eating cookies, brownies, gummies, and candies. Edibles, really, it's best to just take straight FICO, a little bit of peanut butter if you can. I know a lot of people don't like the taste, but please don't add diabetes to your illness because you're eating a lot of bad edibles. All right, so edibles, the base to them is usually either infused cooking oils, canna butter, or just straight FICO or cannabis oil. So if you have FICO, you can get to any other method that you want to use. FICO is, like I said, a base to a lot of different things. So edibles, they're harder to blend into guaranteed dosing. Even in the dispensaries with all of these pre-made edibles, there have been issues with blending and making sure that what's in there is actually in there so that you can get the proper dosing. So edibles, again, start low and slow, and keep a choline supplement on hand for those times you take too much or need to avoid psychoactivity. This specific brand is just what I have in my house. I found it up at my local natural food store, but any brand should do. And please follow the directions on the bottle. So inhaled cannabis, a lot of people are down on that right now, but it does have a value. It is for acute symptoms. It is not as strong as edibles or oil, and it does not last as long. So you need to think of this as immediate release for acute symptoms. Unfortunately, overheating destroys a lot of the cannabinoids and terpenes, and it isn't the best recommended method, but it is effective. Say if you're having excruciating pain, or one of the best things that I use inhaled for is extreme nausea. Without inhaled cannabis, I don't know that I could treat the extreme nausea that I have from autoimmune diseases. Smoking does legitimately deposit more tar than cigarettes. So if you have lung conditions or asthma or things like that, it's not necessarily something that might be as recommended, though it can be used as an expectorant. So if you are smoking, don't beat yourself up. It's totally fine. Just know that it does deposit more tar, so you may want to go easy and just save it for those times where you need it. Also, you use this for immediate release symptoms. So like I said, immediate release medication. Dabbing is a form of inhaled cannabis where it's superheated and vaporized instantly. It would be equivalent to strong narcotics. So this would be a more heavy hitter. So if you're having really super bad pain, if you're having muscle spasms that need to be stopped right away, that sort of thing, you would definitely want to look into dabbing. But once you go up to dabbing, some of these other methods become less effective. So save these tools for when you need it. And there has not been a single proven case of cannabis causing lung cancer. As a matter of fact, there is a Donald Tashkin study that showed that using inhaled cannabis actually could have a protective result. It was a tiny protective result, but it was a protective result. So dietary supplement use, and this for many severe diseases, especially when you get into autoimmune and cancers. This is crucial. And having access to this is one of the hardest things to find when it comes to using cannabis therapeutically, but can be one of the most effective. Adding 2 to 4 ounces of juice every single day and juicing the buds and the leaves, it can provide tons of benefits. This is the antioxidants. It's filled with THCA, a lot of the acid forms of these cannabinoids, and it's a whole plant. It doesn't destroy the terpenes, and your body, it just does your body good. It's in a form that is very bioavailable, but do note that GI patients are sensitive to chlorophyll, so you may or may not want to start off with a full 2 to 4 ounces if you're treating GI issues. Just go easy on that. Maybe use other forms of cannabis until you heal your belly a little bit first, and then start going for the cannabis. So last but not least, I wanted to go over some of the patient concerns when using cannabis therapy just in general. And as you can see here, and I have permission to use this, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome is getting a lot of press these days. This huge illness is coming up, this mysterious cyclical vomiting illness. Cannabis hyperemesis syndrome is incredibly rare. It is a real syndrome. However, it's incredibly rare. So what's happening and what we're finding in these hospitals is any person that's going in with GI issues that admits to using any form of cannabis hyperemesis syndrome or cannabis abuser is actually ending up in their files. So the stigma and the medical persecution happening in here are real patient concerns and something that you may need to be aware of as you're researching this and you're looking and you're seeing the information on cannabis hyperemesis. Know that there is some reporting misconduct, some scientific misconduct happening there, but also understand that this could be an issue for you too. We had a 16-year-old Crohn's patient go into a hospital here in Colorado Springs and be told that he wasn't having a Crohn's flare. He was having cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. He had been without cannabis for 2 weeks. He had taken a trip back to his home state of Illinois to see his family and come back to Colorado and had been in a Crohn's flare. There was no cannabis in his system at the time causing any type of issue. So these things do happen, and it could be an issue. The number one issue is cost prohibitiveness. It is not an affordable treatment. None of this is covered by insurance. Dispensaries are incredibly overpriced, and a lot of times those same dispensaries don't meet the needs. Try finding THCA, CBC, CBG, or THCV. Try asking any of the bud tenders what to pair, what terpenes to pair with what cannabinoids for extreme pain. Most of them don't understand those things. So you will have to get this knowledge yourself. And the other thing is, it's not just the industry. The doctors also do not know what this is. So you can't go to a dispensary and you can't go to your doctor and ask these things. You have to connect with the patients, and you have to connect with the clinicians that are actually working with medical cannabis patients and taking this data. And the last thing I'm going to go over right now is the recriminalization. Every single state that has legalized recreational or instituted very highly regulated medical programs is starting to receive pushback, and those programs are starting to be stunted. Here in Colorado, it is 2018, and we are in the process of fighting a recriminalization that's happening. And here, Colorado is supposed to be a leader. So if you do get into using therapeutic cannabis, understand that keeping up with the laws of your local jurisdictions in your state are going to become instrumental. Otherwise, you could find yourself using a therapy that works, but then all of a sudden you become a criminal. And that's what's happening to a lot of us here in Colorado. Normally at the end of this, we would take questions and answers, but since this is the recorded version for YouTube, I get to say see you later. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. And thank you so much for tuning in.